Thank you very much, Derek. Thank you for asking me. What a wonderful introduction. I wouldn't have said that myself, so thank you. My name is Kathy. I am an alcoholic. I have a sobriety date, which is March 13th. March 16th, 2016. And I have a home group, two home groups, which is the Big Book Comes Alive and the Recover group in Belfast. And it's an honor and a privilege to speak in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And Derek had asked me a little while ago, and my sponsor has always taught me never to say no to Alcoholics Anonymous. And she shows up when she's called upon. Hence, an hour ago, we were at Howard's meeting, and our speaker didn't show, and I texted her, and immediately she was on the call. And I believe that when we come into Alcoholics Anonymous, we are taking actions based on the actions around us. Like, talk is cheap. So Derek has asked me to speak on steps 1, 2, and 3, and I really love the reading that was read, the foreword to the first edition. I was taught that, this we is this 100 men and women. I am not a we until I complete the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that was news to me. I was also taught that this is a basic textbook, which means I have to study it. And this is what the 100 men and women have painstakingly laid out for us to follow. And, I spent 5 years in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous like a swinging door. And to be honest, I did not hear about what the problem was. I heard enough about the solution and the steps, and I seen them on the wall. I didn't have a problem with the word God. And it was my sister that told me to come to AA at the age of 22. And I thought to myself, okay, you're the only person in America that's related to me, so I'm going to go, because I don't want to be thrown out of your life, basically. So I went to AA. I had 3 months of sobriety. I couldn't stay sober. And I kept thinking to myself, what is this I have to do? Like, I go to work, I go to a meeting, I go to work, I go to a meeting, I go to work, and I go to a meeting. Like, my life evolved around meetings. And I really thought that, as the textbook says, that I was going to need a bodyguard, or I was going to be locked up, because sure as hell's enough, I was going to drink. And eventually I would drink, right? Because of my mind, not because of my body. And eventually, the part in the book, it talks about, and more about alcoholism, like, he could not stop even when he wanted to. And I'm paraphrasing. And it did not cross my mind that, in the year of 2016, that I had actually really wanted to stop, and I couldn't stop. Because for 5 years, I did it for my sister. I did it for losing a job, for an injury, for X, Y, and Z. I knew there was something terribly wrong with me, but I didn't know what. And I could see that, at the start, that, and maybe my life was a bit chaotic, but it wasn't the alcohol. And at the end, I came to see it was the alcohol. And my pride and ego, as Bill speaks about in the book, would not let me tell my sister that I need help. You see, like in Bill's story, it talks about this sumptuous apartment, all these things he has on the outside, but on the inside, in the progression, I couldn't stop drinking, right? But I had to make sure that all of the outsides were fine, but the progression was inevitably getting stronger and stronger. And alcohol had beat me into a state of reasonableness. It was a great persuader. Like you mentioned that word, frothy emotional appeal. I love it because, I come from a lineage of sponsorship where, if you don't believe you're an alcoholic, there's no one keeping you here. It tells us in the book what to do. And hopefully we'll see you within a couple of months, couple of weeks, or whenever the time comes. Because alcohol was the only thing that could give me a step 1. And I believe that was my first spiritual experience, which was actually this thing that was more powerful than my mother, my job, my sister, my family. an institution, because I would get out of the institution, I would drink. So it was the power of my life. And, you know, about a year, it was either going to be in that moment. I had this moment where, as I told you, I couldn't stop. And I would find myself at a bar every single evening, incomprehensible demoralization. And I had stopped making that, you know, that promise in the morning when we wake up with the 4 hideous horsemen, and we go, okay, like for me, it was, I got my wallet. I know where I am. Do I have to go to work today? Let's make it there. And I would make a promise. I'm never going to drink. I'm never going to drink. And come 4 o'clock again, I would say to myself, oh, the jukebox started to play. I was a bartender. Maybe I'll have a drink tonight. And I come to the stage of my drinking where I didn't have that. I just knew I was going to drink. And, you know, it was either in that moment, around that time, my last drunk was a year long. And I said to myself, it wasn't me, obviously, but I listened and I said, okay, was you're either going to go to Skid Row, and even if someone came and tried to help you, you're not going to get off the streets and you're not going to get help. Because, you know, if you do get help, you're still going to drink. So it was either that or death. So I got myself home to Ireland, and, you know, I started going to these meetings in Alcoholics Anonymous, and Bill talks about in the first page of his story, I was very lonely again and turned to alcohol. And I had that thought, this is a new town. I'm home in Ireland. I've never drank here. And, you know, it became clear to me that alcohol was my solution, because no matter where I went, I brought myself, but I just knew that it wouldn't work. So I went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I started going to 2 meetings, and eventually 6 months later, I was contemplating suicide. But like I tell you, my pride and my ego, I had the makeup on. I was doing everything I needed to do to look good on the outside. And one guy came up to me in a meeting, and he had talked about how many countries he had traveled to, what his career was, how he had a relationship. And this person was no one I had ever seen before in this meeting. And he told me to come to a big book study. And so I came, and he told me, you get a sponsor. If you don't get a sponsor, you're going to drink and you're going to die. So I took that direction because I was convinced. And so I sat down with my sponsor and I started reading this book, and it started to change. And you guys read about it. You read about how we're 100,000 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And in that moment, my transformation started. I started to change on the inside. You see, I always thought I would get it by osmosis, by maybe you have a good share, I'll sit beside this person in the meeting. Oh, don't let me sit beside that person meeting. They're really sick, right? Meanwhile, we just read forward to the first edition. Many do not know that the alcoholic is a really sick person. Needless to say, did I know how sick I was? That applies to me too. And so we sat down and we read, and you guys know the big book better than me. We're all, you know, on this journey. But when I opened up the doctor's opinion, and I learned today there's a difference between, it talks about the doctor's opinion, the doctor's theory. And there's a difference. The doctor's opinion is about the medical profession and what they know. And then there's the doctor's theory. And it's mentioned both in the doctor's opinion. But it tells me that I must believe that my body is quite abnormal as the mind. And nobody had talked this language in meetings. And so I was going, what do you mean? So you mean that I can't control the amount I drink? Oh, that my body is different, that I'm a distinct entity, that I'm actually friendly, able, and intelligent person. But when it comes to alcohol, when I put it into my body, that I can't control it. I don't know when it's going to stop. It's like a beast of its own. So this was news to me. Nobody talked to me about this doctor's opinion. And, you know, I was taught that 33% of our big book is devoted to step 1, and it's no coincidence. You know, step 1 for me, if you're new in this room and you're thinking, what is she talking about? You know, or you're coming back, you know, the thing is for me was to get a sponsor and to go through this text, because I did not know. And, you know, that was one part of my problem. The doctor talked about my body, but no one had ever talked to me about it. They talked about these things in meetings like stinking thinking, and it's the first drink that gets you drunk. And I used to think, I don't know, and just don't pick up no matter what. And I said, I pick up no matter what. I can't stop. But I couldn't say that because I thought, well, maybe I'm not in the right room. And I did not want to not say that. Sorry, I did not want to say it in case I get thrown out of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then I learned more about alcoholism, why that I'm this rethread, that the first drink is the drink, that subtle insanity, like it talks about in, I think it's Jim's story about suddenly the thought crosses his mind. And that's the way it always happened to me. And sometimes I thought about it and sometimes I didn't. Sometimes there I was at the bar and sometimes I was on the train contemplating, please don't let me go to the bar. Please don't let me go to the bar. But it talks about then the fact that, I'm just going to turn to my book because I'll mess it up. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. And when I'm sober, at certain times, I can't bring into force the suffering of a week or a month ago. I am without defense against the first drink. So maybe there was 1 or 2 times I could say no. But every other time I was doomed to failure and I would pick up. And then it gives us 5 examples in more about alcoholism, about, we have this man of 30, the jaywalker, Jim and Fred. And to me, that talked about the mind and what precedes the mental relapse into, what precedes a relapse into drinking, because the problem center is in here. And, I used to, every time I would pick up, I thought it was going to be different. And I always say this to the people I work with, the different is different for you, like fill in the blank. For me, it was one time, I needed to be in a relationship. So I need to, go and drink after having a period of sobriety. Like, these crazy things, these lies. And I love how the book talks about subtle insanity. It's in my own words, right? And so for me, that explained a lot, especially my change was, again, with the doctor's opinion. And I don't have very much time, so I don't want to keep going on. But, out of the strenuous work of step 1, and to be able to concede to my innermost self. And I didn't get conceived to my innermost self, at the first page, at the 5th page, Bill's story, page 3. It happened in a moment where I can't explain. It was actually one day when I was riding my bicycle and I was listening to a speaker tape. And in that moment, I conceded that my back was to the wall. I'm not going to swear here, but I used the F word. And I knew that every step that comes after step 1, I will do no matter what, right? And so I knew that I needed power, that lack of power was my dilemma. And a dilemma is not just something that, it's kind of a dilemma. It's a dilemma. It's a big deal. Like, my lack of power was the problem. And that how on page 52, I was a prey to misery and depression every morning, getting up, filled with fear, knowing I had a college to go to, knowing I had things to do, and I couldn't get out of bed because I was filled with fear and wanting to end my own life. And I was on page 52, and that 3rd part of step 1, admitting that I'm powerless over alcohol and that my life had become unmanageable. And so I have a body that doesn't need a drink, but a mind that tells me it's a good idea to drink. So the physical allergy is either going to make me drink myself to death, and the mind, once I stop, will bring me back. So how come I couldn't stay stopped? It wasn't about stopping, it was about staying stopped. And so from all of that evidence of reading inner text and matching.
Kathy, 1 more minute.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
And matching my experience with the text, I was able to go on to seek and define this power greater than myself. And we have a chapter to that. And then step 3, being convinced, we're not at step 3, being moved by the evidence from step 1 and step 2. I was able to make that decision to pursue the rest of the program, which is steps 4 through 12. Some say 4 through 9, but I say 4 through 12. And I'm really sorry. I feel I rambled too much on step 1. but I'm really glad to be here and I hope it helps someone. So thanks for asking me.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric.
You're
Hey,
welcome.
everybody. My name is Rebecca C., and I am a grateful recovered alcoholic. And Kathy, thank you so much for your message. That was really great. You touched on a lot of stuff that I want to touch on as well. It's always an honor for me to be asked to do anything in AA. And much like Kathy, I have been taught never to say no when asked to do anything. So thank you for allowing me to be here. My sobriety date is November 3rd, 2019. I've had a home group since the moment I've gotten sober. And I'm very grateful that I learned early on and was taught early on to stay in all three parts of the triangle, unity, service, and recovery. And service is important to me. I have commitments in my home group. I have had commitments at the district level, and I have the absolute best sponsor for me. I actually sought out my sponsorship lineage and sought out my sponsor because I knew that I wanted a level of freedom that I have obtained through my sponsorship, and I'm extremely grateful for that. I also sponsor a lot of women, and a lot of the women I sponsor have a lot more time than me, and I'll talk a little bit about that when I get to kind of what it's like now. So, I introduced myself as a recovered alcoholic, and I think that's important. It's not about me. It's not to toot my own horn. It's because I think it's important that we let the newcomers know, like Kathy said, that we don't have to stay sick, right? It says in the foreword, like she had mentioned, that, we are recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. And that is true for me today. And if I thought I was going to stay sick when I got here, I wouldn't have stuck around. And the truth is, I am recovered of a hopeless state of mind and body. And I'm also clear that if I stop doing the things that I know I need to do, that I can become unrecovered really quick. But today, I am recovered. So a lot of times when I tell my story, I talk a lot about the past. I'm not going to talk a lot about my childhood, but I am going to say a little bit. It's important that I spend some time talking about how I was in AA and still dying of alcoholism. But in my childhood, the one thing I want to talk about is I did have a lot of traumatic experiences happen to me, like a lot of us do. But the reason that's important, the details are unimportant, but what's important to me and my story is, when we talk in the fourth step about getting down to the causes and conditions of why we drink, I would have told you for years and years that the reason that I was an alcoholic was because of those things that happened to me. And if that was true, right, if the reason that I was an alcoholic was because of all these traumatic things that happened to me, then all of the therapy that I spent thousands of dollars on would have fixed my alcoholism, right? I've done EMDR, breath work. I went to a trauma facility in New Mexico that I refer to now as trauma camp. And I'm not going to say that that wasn't good, right? It did exactly what it was supposed to do. It treated my trauma. But what it did not do is it did not touch my alcoholism. And the problem for me, my inability to realize that those two things were separate almost cost me my life. And what's true for me now, we talk about alcoholism being three parts, physical, which Kathy touched on, mental, and then spiritual. And what I believe was true for me then, that I was confusing with the things that had happened to me, is that I was suffering from a spiritual malady. And what that looked like for me is I never really fit in, right? I never really was comfortable. There was always something wrong with me. My insides didn't match your outsides. I was always one step behind, not really comfortable in my own skin. I've always had a mind since I was little that has just relentlessly tried to take me out. Even today with all the work that I do in AA, my mind is constantly, part of my spirituality is just this battle between my mind and my business. And I go from 0 to 100, right? Just normal things that happen as a business owner. I'm like, you know what, we're going to have to load up the U-Haul, go close the business down, and move to a different state, right? It's like not A to Z, there's no B or C. And one of the things that drove me into getting sober was actually fear of my mom dying. And it's like, if she's not answering her phone, it's not that she's just at the grocery store, right? It's like she's fallen, she's died, and it's the end of the world. So this is just how my mind has always worked. And I've always needed something to settle this down and to settle just this restlessness that's inside of me. I remember a funny story about my therapy is I remember going to the therapist once and she said, what are you here for, Rebecca? And I was like, well, I'm here to deal with my mom's death. And she's like, oh, I'm so sorry. When did she die? And I'm like, well, she hasn't. I'm just trying to get ahead of the eight ball. So some of us are sicker than others. And I can say I am definitely sicker than others. But, the book talks about, I think, introduces the spiritual malady as restless, irritable, and discontent, right? So I restless, irritable, and discontent when I am not drinking. And the way that looked for me is restlessness looks like, where I'm at is just not where I want to be. Or my target's always moving. When I get this, I'll be happy. And in my whole life, other thing I did to fill this void and the spiritual malady was relationships. From the age of 14 to 40, I was continuously in relationships. Actually, I shouldn't even say relationships. I was holding people hostage. That's more the truth of what I was doing. And then irritable to me, I've always had this rage, right? I always thought it was the things that happened to me, but I've always just had this rage brewing inside of me. It also looked like I had started having panic attacks, a lot of anxiety. I couldn't drive a car. And then discontentment for me looked like depression, right? I was always kind of depressed. And I feel like a lot of alcoholics, we get diagnosed with clinical depression and we get diagnosed with bipolar, and I've been diagnosed with so many things, but the truth is it was just a part of my spiritual malady. And this malady that I've had since I was a young kid is going to demand to be treated one way or the other. And the only two things that I've ever found that has ever treated this malady is either alcohol or a spiritual experience through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's going to be a long time in my story before I'm really willing and able to see that that's even an option for me. So, let's see. So when I started drinking, I believe I had the malady since I was very young. The other thing I believe that I had was the allergy that Kathy did a really good job talking about. So I started treating my malady with alcohol when I was 14 years old. And a couple things, alcohol worked against me from the very beginning. From the minute that I took a drink, it worked against me, but it was so powerful in treating that malady that I could disregard that entirely. So from the minute I drank, I had consequences. I was court ordered to 8A at 14. I remember sitting at the Howe place in Atlanta and thinking, what a bunch of losers, a bunch of old men smoking cigarettes. And I'm like, this is not what I need. Hindsight's 2020, because here I am. But I'm drinking to a blackout. And the other thing, when the book talks about a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, when it's describing like alcoholics, that was me. Rarely mildly intoxicated, more or less insanely drunk. The minute that I started drinking alcohol, it treated this malady, but it immediately out of the gate gave me consequences. I did incredibly tragic things when I was drinking, just like the book talks about. I held someone at gunpoint while drunk in a blackout. I was dating someone, and the story used to be that I was just trying to get them in the car. But the truth is I was actually trying to kill the person, because I remember thinking, I'm going to kill you. So I hit someone with a vehicle, could have killed them. I started a fire in a house while I was in it. So out of just immediately reckless, tragic behavior. And really, these consequences don't have anything to do with me being an alcoholic. But what they did do is they drove me into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? Because the only thing that I wanted when I first came into the rooms in 2000 was to not have consequences anymore, was to learn how to drink without getting in trouble. So my first experience in AA, I was in a group. It was probably a lot of hard drinkers in this group because they were saying things like, they woke up today and made a decision to stop drinking, like meeting makers make it. And I was able to I say stay sober. I wouldn't call it sober. I would say dry, but I was able to remain dry for a year at that time. Um, I don't even think they had steps on the wall. If they did have steps on the wall, I missed it entirely. I don't remember ever seeing a book, an AA book. There was one guy that ran around with a book like all worn and tethered, and he had notes and highlights. And I'm like, what? Why would you carry a book about AA with with notes in it? And now here I am with my book with notes in it. But I just completely missed the boat entirely. And what happened for me in that situation was the only reason I was staying sober is that I was being driven by my need to be in a relationship. So at that time, the person I was seeing was sober. So I was going to stay sober. And I pulled that off for about a year. But as soon as that relationship ended, I was right back at it. And Kathy talked about it. I had no idea yet what being an alcoholic meant, right? I knew that it was causing me trouble, but I had no clue what really being an alcoholic meant. And when she talked about suddenly, it talks about in the book, suddenly, right? I'm going to get stuck. I'm going to get struck drunk. That is what my experience was. As soon as that relationship ended, I walked into a bar and without a second thought, it didn't matter what consequences I had. I ordered the drink and I was back off to the races because I cannot tell the true from the false. And that was in 2000. So I'm out drinking again. I'm drinking again for several years. At this time, I'm burning my life to the ground. I'm doing it really well. In this period of time, I had gone to 5 rehabs. I just want to check my time. 5 rehabs. I had been in 4 mental institutes for suicide attempts. And I had been to jail at this point 8 times for physically fighting. I was a very mean drinker. And so once again, these consequences are piling up on me and I realize I need to do something different, right? And so I get driven into the rooms of AA again in 2012. But my experience this time is a little bit different. And at this point, I'm in a group that's active. They're talking about the solution. They're heavy in the book. And I was sponsored by a woman that actually started the group. So I'm rubbing shoulders with people who know this book and are really doing the deal. But the problem is that I still don't understand my condition, like Kathy's talking about. I still don't really understand what it means to be an alcoholic. And I remember they would be like, I'm calling my sponsor with a real problem, right? Like, I've lost another job. Like, this is serious. And she's like, call someone else. I'm like, did you hear what I just said? Why would I call someone else? Like, I just told you I have a real problem. So I'm missing the entire boat. I also see God on the wall. I don't want anything to do with God. I have a false illusion of power. Okay. I've been on my own since I was 14. I'm an atheist, agnostic at best. And I knew that AA was working for people, but I felt sorry for them that they had to do the steps on the wall because that wasn't my truth. Because again, I don't know my condition. They would pass the basket around and I'm like, why would I put money in the basket, right? I'm self-centered. I need to go buy a coffee. And so I say all of that to say I hung around that group for about a year and completely missed the entire point because my experience has been in AA from 2000 to 2000 and when I got sober 2019. If I do not understand what alcoholism is, the steps are going to push me out. And that is exactly what my experience was. And so I get pushed out of AA. I have a resentment. I'm never coming back, all the good stuff that we do. And so what happened? I mean, I'd already had enough consequences that wasn't ever going to get me to stop drinking. And I don't think that's the reason why we end up stopping drinking. What happened for me is I hit such a spiritual, emotional bottom. And I remember thinking, if my mom dies or my dog dies, I'm going to kill myself. And I have zero tools to be different. And the walls started to close in on me. And drinking was always a problem. So it wasn't even the drinking. It was like that was always an issue. But I remember thinking I need to do something different. I need to do something different and I need to be willing to do something I was never willing to do before. And I was in Denver, Colorado at the time. I drove my dog from Denver to Atlanta, dropped her off, and I checked into a sober living. And I'm grateful for that experience because it removed me enough from me. And I was finally willing to do something different and big. Um, and inconvenient for myself. And I believe if I hadn't made that decision, I don't know that I would have stayed sober. But fast forward to COVID. So COVID happens, right? And I'm trying to stay sober, and I realize I'm driving to Charleston with my mom, and I said out loud, if something doesn't change, I'm going to drink again because I still don't know what alcoholism is. And I picked up my phone and I put on a speaker take, and it happened to be Chris Raymer. And he was talking about step one. And I'm telling you, when I heard him talk, it was like he was talking to me. He explained alcoholism in a way that I knew in that moment, oh my God, if this is true, I'm in trouble. And there is nothing that I'm going to be able to do to get better unless I do this work. And so I got in touch with him. And as soon as I got in touch with him, it changed the trajectory of my life. I got in touch with Chris and I got in touch with my group where my sponsor is based out of, which is PPG Group in Austin. I had heard Katie Parker talk, and she had a level of freedom that I wanted because when I got here, I was either going to put a gun to my head and pull the trigger, or I was going to do this work at a level so that I was free. And I got better, and I got better quickly, and that is my experience. And she took me through the steps. And I'm going to tell you, I am so grateful, not only for Chris's message, but for his message pushing me to my sponsorship lineage. Because what they did for me is they said, hey, Rebecca, I don't know if you're an alcoholic or not, but you know what? We're going to find out right now through your experience. And like Kathy had mentioned, you know, there's a reason that from the doctor's opinion all the way through page 23, you know, they're talking about the first step because it is imperative that I understand what being an alcoholic is, because I can be around the best people in AA doing this deal. And if I don't get that, I'm not sticking around because the steps push me out. And so I got busy in this work. My experience is I did the steps really quickly. And I'm so grateful for that because I can mess some shit up. Excuse me for saying a cuss word, but I can. And so I got busy fast so that I could get to the solution quick because my mind is going to take me out. So my experience in step one was very powerful. And I do understand now why they say the first step is the only step you have to get perfect. And it's true. And the way that, you know, she took me through, let's find out through your experience if this is true. So step one, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. There is a hyphen. So that is one part of that statement. So step one for me means I am powerless is synonymous with allergy. So I have a body that doesn't break down alcohol properly. And as soon as I take alcohol in my system, I'm going to develop a phenomenon of craving, which is the allergy like Kathy spoke about. So my body is going to demand that I drink more than I intend to drink, whether I want to or not. And so this explains all the times that I'm blacking out. Why am I blacking out? Why can't I have two? Why can't I have three? Like I can run a business, but I can't just have 3 drinks. Like baffling. Now it's making sense. My body, like Kathy said, is different. And I need to understand that, like the doctor's opinion says. And so then the second part of step one is admitted that our lives had become unmanageable. I used to think what they were talking about was the unmanageability of the job and the house and the car and the relationship. But that's not what they're talking about because that's just a consequence, right? There's people in AA that haven't lost the thing that are dying of alcoholism. So what they're talking about in that second half of the first step is I am unable to manage my thoughts around alcohol. So I have a mind that's going to lead me to the first, whether I want it or not, and a body that demands that I have this, or the mind that's always going to lead me to the first, and a body that demands that I have the second. And I had to get really clear on that because this is what makes it a fatal illness for me and what keeps me anchored down in the addiction. And so I found that out through my own experience. I found out how lack of choice, what it looks like losing the power of choice. And like Kathy had mentioned, it was so imperative that I was clear on what step one was in my own story, because then and only then am I going to do these steps like my life depends on it. There's just no way I'm going to get to a 9 and face that if I don't know that my life depends on it. So that was my my experience with step one. Steps 2 and 3. Again, I came in here an atheist, agnostic at best. But if I'm clear that I am powerless and that I am beyond human age, then I'm going to reach for a power, right? And I'm grateful again for my sponsorship, because she said, "Hey, Rebecca, you know what? Your power only needs to be 1 inch more powerful than you only. That is it at this point. If you can admit that it's more power, can be more powerful than alcohol, then you can proceed." And I could do that at that point, right? I could sign up. I could sign up for that. That made sense to me. Then I get to step 3. And now I'm like, okay, I don't know about this step 3, because this is sounding a little religious to me, right? I'm picturing that I'm going to have to, like, what do you mean turn my life and my will over to the care of God? Like, what? Because I'm picturing I got to wear a moo and stand on a church corner and pass out Jesus pamphlets. Now, listen, if you do that, I have no problem with that. Good for you. It's just not what I had pictured for my life, right? So she's like, hey, step 3 doesn't have anything to do with that. The first requirement is that we be convinced that that self running the show, that Rebecca running the show, is not a success. That's the first requirement. So now I'm stepping back and realizing, okay, wait, the stage character that the book is talking about, I do that. I am always trying to run the show, and I am trying to get my way. And even when I'm nice, I'm trying to get my way. And so she taught me that step 3 is less about faith and more about self doubt, right? Seeing that self reliance had failed me. And as long as I could just see that clearly, and then step 3 is all about a decision. And I remember someone told me once, 3 frogs are on a log, right? And one makes a decision to jump in the water. How many frogs are on the log? Well, there's still 3, because all it did was make a decision. It hasn't jumped yet. And all I got to do is make a decision that I'm willing to go through 4 through 12. And in that, that's where I found God. So steps 4 and 5 were absolutely huge for me, right? So I'm writing an inventory. It's not hard for me to write who I'm mad at, why, right? I've carried this stuff around forever. I was a victim to my own story for years. This was easy. But then I'm getting to this 4th column where I'm supposed to disregard this person entirely. And where am I at fault? So that means if this person is perfect, where am I at fault? And this is really, truly where I was set free, because again, I was a victim. I was a victim, and victims don't get sober. And I was a victim to my story. I was a victim to the things that happened to me. And now my sponsor is walking me through a journey to look at things from an entirely different angle. And this is where I really, really, truly got some freedom, and where I got free of all of that stuff that, while it's still a part of my story, it's just my story. It does not define me. And, the way that I was taught to do the 4-step, we talk about, how did they affect us? Did it affect our self-esteem? Did it affect our pride? Did it affect our, sex relations? I believe now that all of my problems come from this 3rd column, right? And so my sponsor is breaking this down. What is it affecting your self-esteem mean? That means how I value myself. So how do these resentments affect how I value myself? Because whatever beliefs I've gotten in this 3rd column, my ego is going to protect these. I go into the world and I harm people based off of these beliefs of myself. And so it was important that I really understood how I operated. Like, what are my beliefs based out of these resentments? And one of my big ones is that you will not disrespect me. And that is a huge, huge, huge character defect that I have. And my ego tries to protect that even to this day. But getting clear on what those things were in the 4th step were super, super powerful for me, so that I could take those to God in step 6 and 7. And I'll tell you a quick story about 6 and 7 and that 3rd column. So, I was in anger management for a really long time. And like Kathy said, lack of power is my dilemma, right? And so I'm in anger management. I'm paying thousands of dollars because I wanted to be different, right? I really wanted to stop being angry. And I remember the therapist was like, hey, Rebecca, just look at that ring. And it was 3 stones, and ask yourself, are you acting out of your child, your adolescent, or your whatever it was? And I'm thinking, I don't have the ability to pause. Okay, but sure, I'll try it. And so I leave. She's in a glass building, and I walk downstairs to get a hot dog, ketchup and mustard at the little concession stand or whatever you call it. And I'm walking out to my car, right? And I walk over, and this lady hits my door with her car. Okay. Well, remember, will not disrespect me. And my belief that you will not disrespect me is my problem, because my ego is going to make sure that you can't, I'm not okay unless you don't disrespect me. Right. So she hits my car and I'm like, excuse me, you just hit my car. And she's like, learn how to F and park. And so I'm like, well, okay. So now I'm yelling. My therapist is looking out of the window down at me, right? And as she's walking off, because I can't let her disrespect me, I take the hot dog and I throw it and I hit her right in the face with it. Like, just nailed her. And so I'm looking up at my therapist and I'm like, I don't know. I think I probably need a refund. Like, this is not working for me. But I say all of this to say, 6 and 7, we take these defects to God, right? So that God can remove these defects, because I am powerless over my conduct. It's not just about alcohol. So that's why therapy, anger management wasn't working for me. So fast forward to I was probably about 2 years sober. And a woman, I had cut her off. I was in Denver and she pulls up. All my neighbors are out, right? And so I did. And she's cussing me out, calling me every name in the book. And I'm the type of person that I could be shaking on the inside, but I'm going to get out and I will fight you. And so as she's yelling at me, I remember thinking, okay, I don't have the power to be different. And I lifted console and I said, God, please help me, because I do not have the ability to handle this situation. And I rolled my window down. I said, you know what? You're right. I'm sorry. I did not look. She keeps on cussing me out. So even if I had the power to have done that the first time, I would have gotten out and been like, I told you I was sorry. And then we would have fought. But instead, I remained calm and I said, you're right. I'm sorry. And so as she drives off, my neighbors are all sitting there. I would love to tell you that I just had this spiritual, like, oh, I did the right thing. That is not what happened, because my ego wants to protect that belief that you will not disrespect me, right? And so I'm like, oh no, it's my ego's like, you look weak, you've lost. Now your neighbor saw you. And I'm like, I should probably chase her down. And then the next thought was, but the victor only seemed to win. Because the truth is, I did win, right? But my ego wants me to think that I lost. And that's what this work is for me. So that's my best example of 6 and 7. Let me check my time. So my experience in 8 and 9 were very powerful. So it's asking us to make a list of all persons we had harmed. Well, how many is all? Well, all is how free do you want to be? Well, I'm going to tell you, you know, the book talks just making amends for drinking, right? We're making amends for self-will and manipulation. That's a lot of people, you guys. I have to go on amends tours around the country because I have caused some serious, serious harm to people. But a really powerful amends story I want to share real quick, and then I'll wrap it up with 10, 11, and 12 is, so I'm about a year sober. And I heard when we were talking about financial amends that we can make payments, right? And I'm like, sweet, I can make payments. Now I owe these people thousands and thousands of dollars, and I'm paying them like $10, $15 a month. It is not objectionable to me. And so I'm sitting on a lot of money at this time, and I couldn't figure out how I had saved up all this money. But the more money I was getting, the more like hoarding, or the more money problems I started having. And I remember I had driven to Atlanta because I was coming to do an amends tour, and something had went through my bank for about $500-600, and I freak out. Right. I'm like cussing my mom. I was at her house, my dog shaking in the corner. My mom's like, oh God, here she goes. I go and I call my sponsor. And at that time, I'm still smoking cigarettes and cheating. And I'm into like smoking. I lost the $600. She's like, Rebecca, stop. Got to yell at me to get my attention. She's like, stop. How much money do you have in the bank? And I'm like, and I knew I was not spiritually well in this moment. I'm like, I have a bunch of money in the bank. She's like, then you don't have a money problem. What you need to do is get with God on the 11th step and figure out what's really going on. And so I did that. And I'm so grateful for my sponsor, because she always leads me to God, right? She doesn't ever tell me the answer. And so I go to God, I do 11. And then the next morning, I'm leading a meeting on amends, right? And I'm sitting here talking to everybody, and I'm saying, well, it says right here that we have to be willing to go to any length. And if we're not willing to go to any length, then we're not clear on step one, blah, blah, blah. The next thought, because my God likes to cuss at me because that's the way you get my attention. The next thought, that inner being, which I believe is God, was, "You are full of shit." And I was like, "What? Excuse me?" And it was like, "Yeah, you're full of shit talking in this meeting. Like, you have all this money." And so the next thought was, "You need to make an amends in the amount of money that you think you lost." And I was like, "Why would I do that? That doesn't even make any sense." And then the next thought after that was, "Actually, that money that you've saved, that isn't your money. That money belongs to other people. And you need to give the money back to who it belongs to." And again, my recovery does not look like me showing up like this saint spiritual person. It looks like a lot of ego and a lot of God fighting it out. But the truth is, because I am so clear on step one, when it became clear that this is what I needed to do, I can tell you, I took half of that savings and I paid every single person who I owed. And I pulled my credit for the first time and I paid all of those creditors back. And I thought the day would come that I would regret that decision. And I can tell you, not only has it not come, that money has been replaced and then some. But had I not have had that first step experience, I would not have made that decision. And I'm grateful for that. And the thing that came out of that is I've become so much more giving with money. I tell this and it's true. I'm the person in the Starbucks line that when they're paying it forward, it stops with me. Okay. There is nobody behind me going to get a drink. Like, thank you for my drink. And I'm moving forward. I am selfish, self-centered. But that experience truly has made me a different person, and I am way more giving with my money. All right, I got a couple more minutes. 10, 11, and 12. These to me are the maintenance steps. These are honestly, I don't want to say the most important steps, but they are very, very important steps to me because this is what keeps me in fit spiritual condition. So, I do a lot of tens. I told you earlier, some of us are sicker than others. I'm one of them, right? Whenever the world and its people are dominating me, it tells me if and when these four things crop up: resentment, dishonesty, self pity, and fear, that I'm supposed to do four things immediately. And one of the most important things that I have to do is a 10th step with someone who does a 10th step the way I was taught to do it. Because if I'm doing a 10th step because I'm mad that somebody is an idiot and not listening to me, and I'm praying for God to make them less of an idiot, that's a little different than when I'm going to my sponsor and she's saying, "Hey, Rebecca, aren't you doing it again? Aren't you expecting somebody to be different and they're not fitting into your mold and you're upset again?" So that's a very different prayer, right? Now I'm praying for God to have me accept people as they are so that the world and its people don't dominate me. So I do a lot of 10 steps still, even at 3 years and 4 months sober, and it saves my butt every time. And I do written 11s. 11 for me, I think they meant in the book when they said meditation, they mean pre-meditation. I'm to pre-meditate my day. And so where it says before we begin our day, we ask God to remove us from being self-pity, self-seeking, or dishonest. So I'm going to write out my day because I know how I operate. And I'm going to write out where in the things that I have to do today am I going to be selfish, self-seeking, and dishonest. There's probably a lot, right? And so now I'm writing those things out and then I'm countering that with what would God have me do. So I'm pre-meditating my day. So this way, when things get thrown at me, I'm a little more spiritually centered. And then I'm taking the whole "we retire at night" all to God. What corrective actions need to be taken for me? And those steps, honestly, without those, I would be an insane person. I really would. It is what keeps me grounded. And then the last one is sponsorship. I got to tell you, sponsorship is probably my favorite thing. And who knew someone as selfish as me would ever say that? I'm not going to say that I'm excited every time I have to meet a sponsee, or that I still have to pray before I actually answer my sponsee calls. Some of them are on here, no offense, guys, because I have to get spiritually grounded because my ego will mess it up every single time. But sponsorship is the one thing that removes me enough from me that God can get in and work. And it's not that my problems like solve themselves while I'm talking to a sponsee. But what happens is by me showing up for another person to try to hold their hand and walk this journey, my perception of my problems change. It's not that they go away. It's that they're just not as big of a deal. And my sponsees save my life on a daily basis because it forces me to keep myself on the beam and in this book. Because one thing I will not be in Alcoholics Anonymous is a hypocrite. So if I'm telling them to do a 9th step, I better be doing a 9th step. So it keeps me on my game, or I'd get lazy. And I don't think I would be in the position I am today. And I truly